Welcome to MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 82. We can call this day Good Yontif. It's the day of the Chassidus, the founding of the Yeshivas Tomchei Tmimim by the Rebbe Rashab, which I'll be discussing in a moment. I'd like to begin by saying that I want to dedicate this particular episode the Elul Nishmas Schneur Zalman Yosef Yitzchak Pevzner, who at the young age of 22 just recently passed away on Elul. And we will be talking a little more about that after I review Chayel and Tezvav Elul, especially the connection, Hashgacha Pratis, that Schneur Zalman had with us, particularly with MyLife Essays Applied and the essay contest. So I will be talking about that just in a few moments. But as usual, I'd like to begin with a timely issue. As I said, Tezvav Elul is the Chassidus, the founding of Yeshivas Tomchei Tmimim and Tafresh Nun Zayin, which would be 118 years ago in Lubavitch. And it came right after the Frierdiker Rebbe's marriage, which was on Yud Gimel Elul on Friday. Same kvi as the same calendar as it is this year. So Sunday was the founding of the yeshiva. Now in the Sichos is brought that the Frierdiker Rebbe was the one that suggested the founding of the yeshiva, and in a sense it was like a wedding gift, and the Rebbe Rashab complied with that after consulting by the oil. But in truth, as the Rebbe brings in different places, it was actually the Rebbe Rashab who already began struggling with the founding of yeshiva years before. In several sichos which I can make reference to, let's begin with Simchas Torah Tafresh Pei Vav, which is now printed in Sefer HaSichos Tafresh Pei Vav in page 98. The Frierdiker Rebbe lays out, 98 and 99, how his father struggled for 10 years to determine whether to open the yeshiva, as I mentioned briefly last week. And in the Sikha of Achnush HaPesach, Tovshin Aleph, which is in Sefer HaSichos Tovshin Aleph, page 104, 105, the Frierdiker Rebbe, in very dramatic fashion, as in Pei Vav, also in a dramatic fashion, describes those momentous days, and how his father announced that his father announced, and everyone was anticipating that on Chai Elul he's going to make a special announcement, and that was what he said. He said that he's establishing a yeshiva on this day, Wednesday. Chai Elul was Wednesday that year, as it is this year. A yeshiva. He says, "Haint is Chai Elul, the Yom HaBoyer," and he says the day when the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov were born, and he writes, "B'Yom HaKodesh," in this holy day, "B'tzivoy Birchas." By command and by decree and by blessing of our great fathers and Rabbeim, I am founding a yeshiva. Was memena vel nareis talmidim bali mesiris nefesh efteri and aveda bedarkei Chassidus Chabad. I'm establishing a yeshiva from which students who will be bali mesiris nefesh, completely dedicated in this complete commitment to self-sacrifice of Torah and aveda in the ways of the darkei Chassidus Chabad. So this is all the commemoration today that we remember this Tomchei Tmimim. And the Rebbe in the different years, in Tovshin Mem Vov, I remember it was the Shabbos after Tezvav. I think that year Tezvav Elul was on Friday. And the Rebbe said that he came back and he thought that there would be Chadarom, that everyone would be on Chadarom, means make an unbelievable tumult about the fact that it's the anniversary of the Chassidus of the yeshiva. And different sichos in the Rebbe, the 80th anniversary of the Yeshivas Tomchei Tmimim, which was in Tovshin Lamed Zayin. The Rebbe spoke a very fundamental sikha printed in the back of Likutei Sichos Chelik Yudalet, volume 14. And it goes on and on. Here's not a place where I can make a compendium of all these talks, but briefly stated, as I mentioned, I will elaborate a little more now. The Rebbe Rashab, as I said, struggled for years to establish a yeshiva because this was unprecedented. The Rabbeim before did not establish a yeshiva. And then in the Kunter Seitz Achayim, the Rebbe Rashab lays out the purpose of the yeshiva, makes it very clear that it's not just for Limud HaTorah, because there are many yeshivas Limud HaTorah. It's for Mesiras Nefesh, for Yiddishkeit, that not just learning Torah, but to use it to transform and conquer the entire world. And then 3 years later, following the founding of the yeshiva on Simchas Torah Tafresh Samach Aleph, the Rebbe Rashab delivered the classic Sikha, Kol HaYetzel L'Melchamos Beis David, Case of Get Krisis Li'ishtei, and that's printed in Sefer HaSichos Tovshin Beis. If you want to look it up, well worthwhile to read it. at the back in the Tafshin Beis, page 141. And there he establishes very, very clearly, and the Rebbe uses the word uses the term nevuah, that it was like a prophecy, because we're talking here now 1900. Remember, Simchas Torah was not yet the new English year, so it was the year 1900, essentially October 1900, and the Rebbe Rashab explains the purpose of Tomchei Tmimim. And he says clearly like this, he says that the Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov that when your wellsprings, the Baal Shem Tov, Chassidus wellspring, the wellsprings of Chassidus will be spread to the outskirts, to the farthest outskirts of the universe, as the Rebbe explains, that's when Mashiach will come. So it's very clear the connection between the two. And then the Rebbe Rashab continues. So now we need to have people who will implement that, who will do the Yafutz Manesecha Chutza. So he says the Beis David had Abra Mulchamas. The house of David, which is the house of David, the soldiers from Beis David, Mulchamas Beis David, they have wars. And he describes two main wars. One, based on the Pasuk. He brings the Pasuk in Tehillim, that the Chorfu Eivecha Hashem, Asher Chorfu Ikfus Mishichecha. And he cites a medrash that says that Im Re'iso Deirach Ader Mecharef, when you see one generation after generation being rebelling, Tzapa Raglav Shal Mashiach, you should await and look forward and anticipate the coming of the legs of Mashiach, which is Igvus of the Mashiach. And what are the two Deirach Ader? One generation that despises and fights against God, Eivecha Hashem, enemies and adversaries of God, of the divine. He describes that in detail, what that means. And then the second is people who are Evdei Hashem, as he says. They're Lemdei Torah mitzvahs. And yet they reject the concept of Mashiach. Everyone can learn in different interpretations what these two apply in our times. But clearly in the past century, from 1900, when that psyche was delivered, Tofrei Samach Aleph, till this day, we clearly see that these are two tremendous challenges. The challenge of those that challenge the concept of God altogether, whether it's the science, whether it's the enlightenment, the different types of intellectuals that challenge the sanctity and challenge the concept of a divine presence among us. Even down to the wars against, for example, God in the schools, some moment of silence, the idea of a God we trust, the foundations of morality of the Western world, those that challenge that. You can interpret that as the first. And then there are those that are Shemrei Torah mitzvahs, as he puts it this way, the words are like this that he uses. Ze gleben, the zweite Teil is, bechal my minim ba'Hashem u'b'terase, not on Kedusha Satera. They're my minim, but the Kedusha is lacking. In a sense like the Baruch HaBatera Tchila, the connection to the purpose of existence, which is, it's not just a theoretical thing and we can continue on in Golos just doing Shemitah Mitzvahs, but a war to actually bring the Geula Mitzvah Vashlema by spreading Torah, by spreading Yadus, Yiddishkeit, and Chassidus. So this is what the soldiers of Tomchei Tmimim are. Well, this is why we established the yeshiva, he says, in order to create soldiers that will fight these battles. So it's very clear what a day like this means. Essentially, it's the day of the foundation of the academy, if you want to put it, the military academy of the soldiers of the house of David, to do what? And he makes it clear, it's not a war with weapons. Not with armies and not with strength. It's beruach. It's a war of spirit. It's a war of spirituality. It's a war of hashkafa, ideology. In the words of the Rambam, it's a war, instead of materialism being an end in itself and being worshipped as such, that the real asik, the ultimate materialism should simply be a means for what? For knowing God, for divine knowledge and divine service. Mola Orez Deus Hashem Kamayim Layom Mechasim. A world filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. And what is Chassidus? Das Hashem. Is teaching us Elokus. Is teaching us Seder Ishtalshalos. It's a mitzvah Raman is Govama Eid, as the Alter Rebbe says in Kuntres Achron, because you're not just learning what God wants of us, what the laws are, how to work, how to deal ethically and divinely and holy in this life. It's not just the nigla. It's Primus HaTorah, which introduces the divine dimension, which is actually discussion about God, about God's way of creating the world, the purpose, and so on. And this is what the soldiers are meant to do. This is what this day should be dedicated to, both understanding what the mission is and rededicating our lives toward that mission. Tez Vavel was the Siyasdus. Chayel was the beginning of the actual Seder Lemudim Yeshiva, a few days later, 3 days later, Wednesday, as it was then, and Wednesday as it is now. Diyem Notlu HaMe'eris, like the Lashon Notlu, the Me'eris referred to, of course, in Pasuk it says on the 4th day, the 2 luminaries were created, the sun and the moon, and Chassidim touched it, the Rabbeim touched it. Chayel is Yem Notlu Me'eris, was a Wednesday. The Chayel is the Yem that Notlu, that the Me'eris were taken, but also Notlu that they were placed and planted in heaven. And which are the 2 Me'eris? The Moed of the Baal Shem Tov, the luminary of the founder of Chassidus Applied, of General Chassidus, and the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chassidus Chabad. The Baal Shem Tov's Chayel Tov Kuf Chof, and the Alter Rebbe in Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel. And therefore that Wednesday, Tov Reish Nun Zayin, years later, the Rebbe Rashab established the yeshiva. So Chai Elul is, of course, the day that brings Chayis into Elul. It is the birthday of the both the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. I have to correct myself. I just gave us the yortzites. The yortzeit is Tov Kuf Chof and Tov Kuf Ayin Gimel, but the birthdays are Nachas and Kohos. Tov Nun Ches, the Baal Shem Tov was born, and Kohos, Tov Kuf Hey, is the birthday of the Alter Rebbe. I was referring to the yortzites. I apologize. Which is actually the Shavuos and the Chavdala Tevis. We're talking Chayel, the birth. So the birth is the Notlu, not with a tes, but with a tof, because it's the birth, it's the placement, the birth of these 2 Me'eris. And therefore the Yeshiva's Tomchei Tmimim is directly connected to these Me'eris, because that's what its purpose is. It's to take the Chassidus taught by the Baal Shem Tov and by the Alter Rebbe, and be mefitz it, spread it everywhere, chutzah, to bring Mashiach, as Mashiach told and promised the Baal Shem Tov. So it's a very clear connection to MyLife Chassidus Applied, our dedication and rededication. With all these years that have passed, we have to surpass everything we've done till now in efforts. No matter what we've done now has to be double, triple, and qualitatively many times over in taking all that we were given, these eitzes, these treasures, and doing everything possible to bring it to the world, each in our own particular way. And that is the promise that's told us, that when that's done, that's the way, the method to bring Mashiach. It's connected to Parshas Kisaveh, which is this Shabbos as well, this coming Shabbos. And some years Chayel comes out on Kisaveh. There's the famous psyche from the Friedrich Rebbe Rashab in the year Tov Reish Nun Beis, where he tells the 7 Torahs that he heard in Gan Eden on Shabbos Chayel, and 80 years that was Tov Reish Nun Beis. And 75 years later, first of all, in Tov Reish Tzadik Zayin, which would be 55, from Tov Reish Nun Beis to Tov Reish Tzadik Zayin would be Samach Ayin Pei. 45 years later, the Rebbe, the Friedrich Rebbe, revealed it for the first time. Until that point, no one knew about it. That's Tzadik Zayin. And then Mem Zayin, which is 50 years later, which means 75 years from when it happened, the Rebbe spoke a very fundamental sikha, printed in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shem Mem Zayin. And I'll just share one powerful element. I was zeicher to write that sikha. And the Rebbe began the Farbrengen there saying the story that the Rebbe Rashab Bahokitz, not in a dream and not at night, Bahokitz went up to Gan Eden that Shabbos and heard 7 Torahs that the Baal Shem Tov said. And he said which Torahs they are. The Friedrich Rebbe L'Kutei Diburim has a whole Agdoma to it in Tov Reish Tzadik Zayin, and then the Torahs themselves, some of it is missing. It details even to whom he said it, to the men, to the women, like a real detailed description of what happened in Gan Eden. And the Rebbe began the question. We know that Chassidus Chabad doesn't koch sich mefsim. But what's the word of the Alter Rebbetzin, the Alter Rebbe's Rebbetzin, when she was asked by someone, where are the mefsim here? By the Alter Rebbe. She said, by us the mefsim are so plentiful that they're rolling around under the benches, no one even bothers to pick them up. And here suddenly, in a very unprecedented and rare occasion, you have this like open discussion about the Rashab going to Gan Eden. And the Rebbe gave a whole beer. When we prepared the Sikha, it seemed like an excellent way to just convey it exactly as the Rebbe said it. Start with that question. That seems like a pella, that Chassidus Chabad, which usually it's more beslapshus and seichel, doesn't do something maftia, something so shocking or something so out of the ordinary, describing how the Rebbe Rashab went up to Gan Eden. So we started the Sikha and we wrote it that way, exactly as the Rebbe said it. And then the whole explanation connected to Elul, And I'll share in a moment the answer. The Rebbe wrote all over on the first page of the Sikha when he edited it, how could we even think of opening the Sikha that way? That itself will shock people. How many people will it bring closer to? And the Rebbe then, I think the only time I know of that the Rebbe actually wrote out the Sifim, how the structure of the Sikha should be. And he said, first start that we're now in the month of Elul. El is Rosh Hashanah ani l'deidi v'deidi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. Which means, Aveda Momata Lamaila, I am to my beloved, and then the Aveda Momaila Lamata, my beloved to me. That's the two general kavim, the two general approaches to all of Aveda. Okay. Then in Elul itself, we're in Chayel. Chayel brings Chayis into this two Avedas. The Aveda Momata Lamaila from the bottom up, meaning from human initiative, and the one from top down, from the divine initiative. And in Chayel, the birthday of both the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov's main Aveda was Mamayil Lamata, because he was Mamshechit in a way of Baal Shem's Ka'ifin, Baal Shem's Kamaisis, and so on. And meaning not always natural, but somewhat above natural, the supra-natural. And the Alter Rebbe was Malbishit more in Chabad, Mamata Lamayla. And then say, Al Pizeh, we can answer a question of a story that happened in Tov Reish Nun Beis. That the Cheder is a strange thing that Chassidus Chabad suddenly talking about Mefsim of this revealed Mefsim. What's the answer? That the truth is the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe come together in Chayel. Because you need both. You need a taste from something higher than existence, and then you need that elikus within existence. And that's the joining of the two. And that's why in Chabad, generally speaking, is Bislapshus, it's a B'darkei HaTeva, but in essence, it's really a higher presence. And once you have the story of the Rebbe Rashab that shows the scholars, that shows that even in Chassidus Chabad, you also have an element that's higher than, even though it's usually not so revealed. This is the way the Rebbe structured. So the whole Sikh is the Rebbe structure. It's the same idea, but it starts and goes mamata lamayla, if you want to use that expression. Ani l'deidi v'deidi li. So it's a Sikh worthwhile learning, and it's of course about Chayel and connected to everything we're discussing, because your futza menesecha chutza, and the Yisod of Tomchei Tmimim is not to do things that break the world. We're talking about taking Chassidus, which is a gilui, which is a revelation that's beyond existence, and putting it into language that relates to existence. As the Rebbe explains in Kuntus and Yonosh Lehiris Chassidus, that Pnimis HaTeira from Hamshach Ayin Beis, Pod V'Sholem Ayin Hey, which is now 100 years from then, and by the way, Ayin Beis is 15 years from the founding of the yeshiva, and the Frierdiker Rebbe makes a whole thing in that Sikha in Tov Shin Aleph, Pesach, Achashah Pesach, how every 15 years was a milestone in the history of Tomchei Tmimim. The first 15 years, Ayin Beis, was 15 years from Nun Zayin. The next one would be Pei Zayin. The next one would be Tovshin Beis in America. And I would assume, even though I've never seen it spelled out, that maybe every 15 years after that was also a particular shlav and stage. But the Frierdiker Rebbe spells out the ones I just did. So Ayin Beis is a stepping stone in what? In the Gilui of Tomchei Tmimim, and its purpose and its objective of bringing Chassidus to the world. And Ayin Beis, of course, does it in the way that Rebbe says Nifloyis, even compared to the Nifloyis of Samach Vov. And of course, Samach Vov is also connected to Tomchei Tmimim, because as the Rebbe brings in the Sikh of Achashah Pesach Tov Shin Lamed, printed in the back of Samach Vov, and also in the additions to Chelik Zayin in Likutei Sichos, Volume 7, the stringing of the four cases, Asudas Mashiach, was connected with Samach Vov, the Gilead of Mashiach, the Ketz that year, and of course with the Torah of Samach Vov itself, the Hemshech of Samach Vov. So these Hamshechim are all bound together with the purpose of the yeshiva, with the purpose of bringing Mashiach, with Yefutza Menesecha Chutza, and all done in which way? A combination of Baal Shem Tov and Alter Rebbe, which means it's Gilead the course L'mayla M'kol Ha'elmas, but it has to be done in a way, as the Rebbe says, Eiris the Teyu and Kelim the Tikkun, Beifan HaMiskabel, in a way that the Kelim can appreciate it, that can assimilate it, can absorb it, and integrate and internalize it. So that's our mission, and that's exactly the mission of MyLife Essays Applied, what we've been doing now for 82 weeks, and hopefully each of you in your own way will take the strength from Tezvovel and Chayel and these special days that lead to Rosh Hashanah to take on achlotas and resolutions, particularly in this fashion, through Fabrengens, as the Rebbe says, Fabrengen everywhere possible, and committing to the commission for which the Rebbe Rashab was Meser Nefesh, and the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe, and all the Rabbeim before who were all part of it, as the Rebbe Rashab makes it very clear that he did it with their blessing and their command. So it wasn't just something he came up with, it was something he struggled with and something that ultimately became a fundamental component in the spreading of Chassidus, which until that point was not yet in the hands of the Tmimim, the soldiers, the young men and women of our generation, the Yetzel Milchamas Beis David, the soldiers that are the Rebbe's children, the Rebbe's soldiers in fulfilling this objective and mission. And may we be zeicher that just with our little effort and lachlota to do something completely different, that alone should already accomplish the job, and then the work will just begin. The work after Mashiach begins by spreading Chassidus, not in dealing with darkness, but from good to better good, as the Alter Rebbe explains in the Geras HaKodesh, the end of Siman Chavav 26. So this is a perfect segue. Let's go right into, as I said, the dedication of this class. Special tribute to Schneur Zalman Pevzner, Olav Shalom. I also want to say that, mention a dedication from Michal Levin in memory of Hashem and Nechama. So Schneur Zalman submitted an essay in the MyLife Essay contest that we launched, the first one last year, Chavdal Tevis. Actually, it's this year, Chavdal Tevis. It's still Tov Shenai and Hey. And he submitted an essay which we gave honorable mention to. At the time, I wasn't sure. I didn't know who he was. But we received a very powerful note, and I want to read the note, at least an excerpt of it at the time, and there was something I wish I wouldn't ever have to read, and which should have remained completely unknown to anyone, but being that his neshama, the Eibishter decided to take his young 22-year-old neshama, I think it's appropriate to both dedicate and read parts of his essay, which I'll do in a moment, which also is quite prescient. And this is the letter I received. Good Erev Shabbos. I'm emailing to let you know that one of the contestants for the Chassidus report contest is Schneur Zalman Pevzner from France. I don't know if you know, but he was diagnosed with brain cancer at the beginning of the year and is currently waiting for a blood transplant. He's in the hospital for a few months already, and it was really hard for him to sit in his room doing nothing. He used to be a very active bocher. Once this contest came up, it totally changed him. He decided to fight depression and work on this project as much as he can. So first of all, thank you for this amazing project. Besides the ruchnis that will add to the world, you should know that b'gashmis, it was a benefit for Schneur Zalman. Doctor said that he changed completely, became positive, which helps fight Yena Machla. For the past weeks, this is what his life was about, this Chassidus thing. Thank you very much for everything you do. Well, I have no words. It's beyond moving to hear such a thing, but to share my sentiment about this. I mean, obviously we had no idea, and we weren't interested in necessarily that anybody should be suffering, God forbid, and we wish he would have been healthy l'chatchila. But to hear how a person in such a matzav should be awakened to Kozach and Chassidus, and to write an essay, which is why I want to read parts of this essay to you, is, I think, an unbelievable inspiration for all of us. I mean, God forbid no one should have to wait for such a matzav, and that it should have given him even one extra day or extra months is to me the tremendous chus, which is not mine, it's chus of MyLife Chassidus Applied, the Chassidus itself, and all that we're trying to do here. I mean, this alone makes it worth it. I wish it would have caused him to be completely alive and stay healthy and alive. God has his mysterious ways. But I felt it appropriate, and I asked, of course, permission to be able to read this note. I thought it was important to share. His essay is in Hebrew, and it's about the battle between matter and spirit. So as I usually review essays at the end, I'm reviewing his essay now, and at the end we'll review another two essays, simply to give it special attention, a special tribute to him, as his neshama continues his journey. I should add, as I was told, that the bocher who learned in Brunoy, France, is the son of Shluchim Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak and Rivka Pevzner, who direct the Sinai schools in Paris. His grandfather, Schneur Zalman, was Rabbi Hillel Pevzner, Olav Shalom, maybe the chief Chabad rabbi in France for many years, and founded the first Jewish day school in post-World War II Paris. A well-known chassid whose father himself was a Tomim, and so on. So the essay he writes, he called it in Hebrew, Hineni Mishakel La'atzmi Ha'efsheri. Am I lying to myself? Is that possible? A 22-year-old boy with a brain tumor writing this essay. I think it speaks for itself what a Tomim is and what the Rebbe produced, that a Bocher should be able to rise and transcend and not find excuses. I'm tired, I'm not well, I'm this. To be able to do this, what kind of lesson is it to what we should be doing with the health and blessings that God gives us? So he addresses what he calls the paradox. That we all deal with a paradox in our lives. And sometimes we don't know who we are, an identity crisis. At times we feel we're connected to the secular world, material world, and at times we feel we're connected to transcendence and spirituality and holiness. And we find ourselves feeling like we're lying to ourselves. Which one are we? Are you this? Are you a Gashmizdika person or a Ruchanizdika person? He says in this Maimon, in this essay, he's going to reveal, according to Chassidus, according to one of the great ideas of Chassidus, how one can come to a peace of mind between this battle. Now you can't help but think that this was a battle he was struggling with himself. Battle of health, and a battle of being a neshama, a chassid, a tomim, and so on. And what's the nekuda? He says the point that he wants to address, his main fundamental principle here, that actually existence was intentionally and deliberately created by God for this purpose, for this paradox. And therefore the paradox should not disturb us. But in a very creative way, and I found it to be beyond his years, maturity, he uses a few case studies. I mean, he creates imaginary characters. He calls Danny as a businessman, married, father of 3 children. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing because this is something that was posted, meaningfullife.com/MyLife/contest. We'll also showcase it in the weekly newsletter if you subscribe to that. So you can read it for yourself. But he describes a case study of a person who indulges in Eilam Haza, but on Yom Kippur or another time he finds himself somewhat spiritually elevated. But then he goes back to his life and he realizes, that Jewish stuff was lying to himself. It was a momentary experience, not real. Is that true? And how does one deal with that? So he brings a mimer from the Rebbe, V'nocha, a love, Tovshin Yudal, it's a Pesach mimer, famous mimer, where he Shtolzachan, the Rebbe explains, asks the question on the mimer of Tikkun Yezer, Ein Sof L'may L'mala Adan Kates, L'mata Mata Adan Tachlis. How could you say L'mayla, the Milo Mata? The Rebbe asks a fundamental question. There's no hierarchy. There's no space. How could you say higher and lower in a reality, in Ein Sof, where the L'mayla Mamokim is before the Tzimtzum? And he cites a story, which again, as I mentioned, is prescient, where he says that there was once a child who asked his father, "Where's grandfather?" That was after he passed away. He's no longer among us. Where is he? And his father said, "He's hu nimtza lamayla. He's above. He's up there." Which his intention was in heaven, the Elam HaNeshama is the world of souls. The child began to become very excited, and he climbed up the steps in his house. He went all the way up to the highest floor, and he says, "I'm looking for my grandfather. He's not there. Not on the second floor, not on the third floor, not on the highest floor." So he ran back to his grandfather and with tears, he says, "Where's grandfather? Where's grandpa? Where's Sabo? Where's our grandfather?" So clearly, this indicates Ma'alamata is relative. And with that, the Rebbe answers the question. This is this mashal that this Bocher, Schneur Zalman, uses. Interesting mashal, considering where his neshama is now. That Ma'alamata doesn't necessarily mean physical space. Maila refers to Ruchnius, and Mata refers to Gashmius. That in every level, wherever you are, there is a level that is more divine and spiritual, and there's a level that's more defined and more matter, more material. And every human being has both those forces, and it's 2 perspectives that all of us have all the time. So existence is based on these 2 perspectives. Even Ein Sof has already those 2 perspectives. L'mayla, amata, mata. And then he applies this to life. And he says, why did God create it this way? Because that's the kavanah, dira b'tachtenim. God wanted to be comfortable, you know where? In a world where he's initially not comfortable. In a world that is mata. A world that defies or denies or conceals the divine. Tachtenim. And there should be a dira b'tachtenim. Not just that God should be present there and revealed and acknowledged, but he should feel comfortable. And that means comfortable in the paradox. That though there's a paradox of these two forces, you're comfortable with it. Goes on with another case study of somebody, it seems like an actual true story, of somebody who was a very secular person, grew up secular, and once took his children, Yom Kippur, to show them, you see these Jews davening, and Yom Kippur, the whole thing is a lie. Because you'll see, as soon as Yom Kippur's over, they'll run like animals home to eat. And then it was a Chassidic shul, a Chabad shul, and what happened at the end of the Ne'ilah, instead of running home, he sees the Chassidim start dancing. And he suddenly has an epiphany, a wake-up call. They're not running home, they're dancing. And they dance more than 2 minutes, more than 5 minutes. And they don't run home right as soon as Yom Tov is over. And that changes perspective, that no, they're not lying. Is that we have two worlds in our lives, where God wants us to be immersed in the spiritual, and there's the time where we have to be involved in the material. And the key is to understand that both of them are part of the divine plan. This is the gist of it, and basically comes away with a practical application that those that live more in the spiritual realm have to know they have to bring it down to the material. Those in the material have to know that there's another side called the spiritual. Very beautiful, and what can I say, better tribute of a Bacher. Maybe the last thing he wrote in Chassidus, that the schus that we have to be able to read and review it, and his neshama should only bring simchas and schusim to his parents and family and choma and consolation. And I felt it appropriate because of the connection, Hashgacha Prati's connection, that this context actually helped him find a deeper peace, and hopefully the Chassidus that he wrote actually helped him find a way, some way to make peace with his own challenges. And God should preserve everyone from such challenges. But Chassidim, we deal with what comes our way, and then we'll soon come to the day of Eid Hashem Ken after be, where we'll understand how all this is part of some bigger plan and bigger aliyah. Be zeichet to reunited with him, with the Rebbe, with all the Chassidim that are in L'mayla Mayla Aden Ketz, and we should have them here L'mata Mata Aden Tachlis. Okay. With that said, let's move on to some subjects. First, some follow-up. Rabbi Jacobson, thank you. There are not enough words to express what a profound influence you are having on my life each and every week with your broadcasts. Thank you for being a living example of what a chassid really is. Your emunah, avos Yisrael, and avos Hashem is palpable in each and every episode. Please keep up your holy work. Hashem should bless you and your family with many more years of health and happiness to continue your holy work. Okay. When someone compliments someone, then they start demanding from him those compliments. So it's a compliment, but also a challenge. So I hope I can live up to some of what you wrote, and thank you for your kind words. 2, regarding the person who wrote inquiring about starting to learn Chassidus in a previous episode, last week, about what to start with. So I spoke about Derech Mitzvah, Mitzvah Avos Yisrael. The writer, I was surprised that you didn't emphasize the importance of having a mashpia, or at least a chavrusa, especially for a beginner. Otherwise, a very smooth, engaging, and informative hour. And so I stand corrected. Yes, I should have mentioned that in learning Chassidus, it's critical to have a mashpia, a mentor, someone that is experienced, like in anything, but especially Chassidus, and a chavrusa. I was referring to what to begin learning, but it goes without saying, and I'm emphasizing, it should be said, not it goes without saying, it should be said that a mashpia who knows you and can help you identify b'mokim sheli b'chafetz, what your heart desires, can help you discover what's the place to begin in addition to everything I've said. In that vein, there's another comment. I watched episode 81 of MyLife and thought your suggestion of where to start learning Chassidus was very interesting, specifically your suggestion to learn Derech Mitzvah. It is the first time I ever heard such a suggestion, and after thinking about it for a little bit, it made sense. I learned Mitzvah Avos Yisrael for the first time a few months ago, and I wish I would have learned this Maimer earlier because it clarifies matters that are fundamental in Chassidus. In addition, he sent me a letter that the Rebbe wrote, and I actually did not have a chance to see if this is printed. I guess it is, but it's from Zayin Nissen Tovshin Tes. And either this is a translation or it's original in English. I'm not sure. It's written to an individual. I'm not going to read the entire letter, but at the end the Rebbe writes, regarding a program of study for Tanya and Chabad Chassidus, you do not say in your letter what you have already studied or whether you are first starting now. If this is a beginning for you, it appears to me, to the extent that it's possible to offer an opinion, that the order of study should be Shari Yuchid V'Amuna, Igeres HaTshuva, and Tanya Volume 1. That's the Rebbe's suggestion. And again, with the qualification, not knowing the details, and if one can give an opinion on this matter. The Rebbe continues, the first time you study these texts, you should not focus on particular words or terms, even if their meaning is not entirely clear, as long as you understand the general concept communicated by the chapter. In order to understand the general concept in the chapters of the first volume of Tanya, the text Kitzur Tanya by the Tzemach Tzedek, published by Kohos, is very beneficial. After studying it once superficially, if you then study the Mamorim and the Sefer Mamorim of my revered father-in-law, the Rebbe Shlita, which was the Frierdiker Rebbe at the time, from time to time, I think you will certainly be able to study the Tanya in a more fundamental manner, and you'll be able to focus on the contents of the chapters in a more detailed manner. It is obvious that if you have questions concerning the above or regarding the study of Chassidus in general, and you think that I will be able to help you, please write to me in a more detailed manner. You can write in whichever language is easiest for you to express yourself, and I will answer according to my knowledge of the subject. At the outset, however, I would like to make one stipulation. You should not feel slighted if my answer is delayed because of my work for Mekos and Yana Chinuch and the like. And the Rebbe concludes with a bracha. Okay, so anyone else that has any sources about this topic or any other topic, please send them. They was the Teyel Sarabim for the benefit of the public. I will definitely share them, and that's the whole purpose of this platform: is to have this dialogue, applying Chassidus to our lives, and things that we have directives of the Rabbeim is of course optimal. If it's inferred, is also good. But anything we can to take and address the issues of our time. So that's for follow-up. The next question. Back to school. Question. Hi, Rabbi Jacobs. First, I want to thank you for the Chassidus Applied revolution. Okay, that's a good way to put it. As a high school teacher, every year I agonize over the first day of school. What message do I want to give over? How will I grab them, excite them? I know that many of my students are not jumping for joy at the thought of sitting behind the desk for hours at a time, day in, day out. Although my subject is Novi, I'd like to walk in and immediately share something uplifting and relevant to my students, something relating to beginnings. After all, we are in Elul. I would very much appreciate your thoughts. Now, there are many, many letters of the Rebbe and the Rabbeim in general about chinuch, obviously such a fundamental principle of what the foundations are. I have not found something specifically, but this is simply my own lack of maybe researching it properly. So if anybody does have something that Rebbe actually refers to at the beginning of school, this is of course the best time to share it. Please share it with me and send it. You could send it to our forum at meaningfullife.com/mylife or my email siman@meaningfullife.com. But I will say that in a number of sichos, when the Rebbe would speak in this period of time, either before the summer or at the end of the summer, he would obviously always be speaking about signing up children and enrolling them in yeshivas, Altaras HaKedesh. And a number of times the Rebbe actually said what the foundational elements, which I think we can derive from that, what should be the way to excite children. Obviously, as you just put it, the worst possible thing is children coming to school forced like pulling teeth and sit day in, day out and bored by the whole thing. So as a teacher, you have a tremendous responsibility and an opportunity, because the first day of school, you can make it very exciting and it sets the tone. Now, how do you make something exciting? Is you always speak, first of all, words from the heart, enter the heart, and secondly, you always have to strike and touch the children in what is relevant to them, which is what I mentioned, b'mokim shalibe chafetz. It's a foundation of chinuch. Chanech lanar al pi darkei. Why does it say darkei? It should say al pi derech Hashem. Since when do we educate children according to their way? Gam ki yaskin lo yosir memenu. That even when he gets older, he won't waver. Why? Because it's his way. You identified and you applied it to his way. It doesn't mean darkei whatever he wants. It means taking the Torah and not just keeping it general and in platitudes that fits to everybody, but applying it to individuals. So knowing your students, knowing their age is critical. You don't write what age, so it's hard for me to address that. But depending on the age, what you have to do is find a way, an exciting way, with a story, with an inspiration, even with a song perhaps. Do something different, something disarming, and show the relevance of Torah and Yiddishkeit to the children. We're now in the month of Elul. Today is the Chassidus of Tomchei Tmimim. Turn it to something compelling. Why do we learn in the first place? Ask your children, why do we go to school? Why do we learn? And maybe use the example the Rebbe uses for Sivus Hashem. Because some people say all the mitzvahs today that Ramban says is Siyunim Heim, meaning they're training for Mashiach's times. Because we're training to change the world. So talk to children and tell them, each of you beautiful children are sent here to earth by Hashem to fulfill a mission that only you and only you can accomplish. Yeshiva and the school you go to, whether it's a boys' school or a girls' school, is meant to be a training ground, just like you take military and you train them for the day that they can go out, so they be prepared. If they have to battle and they become adults and they don't have the tools, they don't have the strategies, and they don't have the wherewithal, they won't be able to do it. So everything needs preparation. School is a preparation ground for Mechamas Beis David, that each of us, to fulfill our mission in your skills, your tools, make it darkei, the darkei of the child. That's why Gam Ki Yaskin Liyosim Menu. Because if it's Chanech not al pi darkei, there's much more question whether he will continue to maintain, because it hasn't become his. He hasn't owned it. The Baal Shem Tov has a Meir Dikavort where he says why we say Elokeinu, Velekei Avesenu, Elokei Avram Yitzchak V'Yankiv. Chronologically, it should be the opposite order. First, it was Elokei Avram Yitzchak V'Yankiv, it was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then it was the God of our parents. And then it became Elokeinu. And he answers because in the early years when we're taught, obviously we're taught by our parents and our educators. But when we become adults, we have to own Darkei. Chanech l'nar pi darkei. You have to own God. It has to be Elokeinu. You're not just worshiping the God of your parents or the God of your grandparents. And then we know, and we're told, the God that you are owning, that you have internalized in a primistic way, that God is the God of your parents and also of Avram, Yitzchak, Yankov. So that's one thing I would focus on. If you're teaching Navi, or you're teaching Chumash, or you're teaching history, or you're teaching Chassidus, whatever it is, find something not specific, almost like set the tone, the mission for what we're going to achieve this year, and make it exciting as a partnership. The best teachers are the ones that have that passion, and the children get excited because you're excited, but you're excited because you showed to them on their level, whatever age, that this can empower them to change their corner of the world. Everybody wants to make an impact. And many people don't understand why we're studying in the first place. We study, and to what end? When you say this study is to help you actualize the keiches Hashem gave you, to fulfill your shlichus in this world. And if it's a Chassidic school, the shlichus that the Rebbe, who's as a shliach of the Eibishter, is telling us what to accomplish, that creates a sense of urgency. It's personalized and it's relevant. That would be my suggestion, and based on different sichos and different letters that the Rebbe has written. Moving right along, and I said again, if anybody has more information, please. Let's do some follow-up on mental health, which is, of course, a major topic, and I want to address that. I was fascinated by your Chassidic explanation of the anatomy of mental illness. I would appreciate, and I'm sure the other listeners would appreciate, if you could provide more elucidation in the practical application of the Chassidic approach toward understanding and dealing with mental health, especially in context to what you mentioned about the different levels of hidden potential and core faculties. And then there's some other questions, but I'll address that after I answer this question. Yes, I intentionally did not conclude the topic last week because it's a major topic, but I'd like to address it now again in context of Chassidus. This by no means is a replacement for medication and therapy and all the professional, but I absolutely am confident that if we understand the Chassidic take on health in general and mental health in particular, emotional health, it can tremendously revolutionize modern psychology. So coupled with the doctor, so to speak, with the understanding how Chassidus understands the inner dynamics of what makes us tick, which of course Chassidus has a unique ability to do so because it's God's gift to us, the blueprint, what makes us who we are, that is the way to really learn to best approach these challenges. So I discussed last week about how Chassidus talks about, based on Kabbalah, the journey from the superconscious to the conscious. But I want to put it into a little more context, in a broader context. The whole Chassidus that talks about that, Seder Ishtalshelus and higher than Seder Ishtalshelus. So generally we speak about Lifnei HaTzimtzum, that the first thing was Eir Ein Sof Memala Kol HaMetzias in the language of Eitz Chaim. It filled everything, which of course is metaphorical language, conceptually, because there was no everything to fill, but conceptually speaking, it was left no room for anything but divine consciousness. And that entered in that dimension, in that so-called reality, the tzimtzum comes. The tzimtzum creates a black hole, a concealment, total concealment, with which we know the shima remains, the impression, or sometimes called the residue. I mean, there are different words for the reishim of that remains, that the tzimtzum is not kipshute, but that's not for now. But there's a tzimtzum. That leaves room, and the analogy given for it, like the teacher who has to silence his mind in order to create space for the student. Then comes a kav, a ray of light, a thin kav chut, a thin ray of light, which is the stream of consciousness from the teacher to the student, in the mashal that the Alter Rebbe gives in the Likutei Torah on this whole idea. And that in turn weaves and creates all of Seder Shtalshus, all of existence. Now, why is this so critical in understanding ourselves? It's because all of us are created b'tselem Elokim in the healthiest possible way. Think of it this way. All of us have a dimension that's a lifnei tzimtzum dimension, where it's exactly aligned with the way God wants it. I should qualify. Lifnei tzimtzum, nothing is aligned because nothing exists. But it is the purest form of consciousness, the purest form of reality that we can relate to. Atzilus, as we know it, and usually we refer to Atzilus the Protis, Atzilus as a world called Atzilus, is the quintessential world. It's the perfect world, perfect universe, exactly as God planned it, the healthiest world. But Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, as many of you may know, in the macrocosm is called Atzilus the Klolos. So Atzilus is the world where it's exactly the healthiest prototype of the human being. There's no illness, no disease. Think of it like before Chet Tzadas, where a human being would live forever had they not eaten from the tree. But then what happens is the tzimtzum and the different distortions, the halomas v'esterim as we call them, the concealments, they take a healthy entity and introduce something that's unhealthy. What happened when the Adam and Chava ate from the tree of knowledge, the Eitz Hadas? They punctured the flow. Health is about a seamless flow of energy within the body, or energy within existence. And as soon as there's a puncture, there's some type of betrayal, there's some type of wavering or wandering away from your purpose. So Hashem asked me, Adam Arishan, Ayeka, where are you? He didn't know where he was, he knew where he was. But you're no longer, I don't recognize it, Tselem Elokim anymore. This is the first indication of something is off, something not healthy. Illness has begun, disease has begun. So if you want to talk about a perfect mind and heart and emotions, the healthiest, that's the way God created it. But then existence, in its own different way, creates the mental distortions, what later can be called chemical imbalances, or the other forces that in some way tamper with and distort the flow that's meant to be a healthy flow of Eidus and Kalim with balance, everything I discussed in last week's episode. So essentially the definition of disease and illness from a point of Chassidus is really an imbalance between the divine and how it manifests into the Kalim, into the containers, and the manifestation in the identity of existence. So Lifnei Tzimtzum, everything is seamless. After the Tzimtzum, Atzilus is still seamless. But then in Bria, Yitzirasi, you begin to go into a state where it's no longer just the pure intention of the Kavana and it's all aligned. There's no seamlessness any longer. What does it translate into the mental health world? That you're beginning to have the first semblance, the first glimpses of something that's distorted. Full blown, it's an actual mental disease, an emotional illness. If it's not full blown, we all suffer from elements of that. That's why we have duplicity, we have our own dichotomies, we have our own conflicts. But in the full-blown sense is when it really becomes an illness, what we would call an illness that needs more intervention than just your own willpower. That means that there's the consequences of these imbalances. I think this is a vital component in understanding the picture. Why is this so critical? Because it means that the way you are in the essence before the distortions is still there right inside of you. We all have within us a Lifnei Tzimtzum and an Atzilus identity as we speak. That's why we say Neshama Shenasata Bi Tahirihi. Even after Ata Baras Ata Yitzat Ata Nefachta Bi. Even after the soul goes through the gradations where it goes through the different shifts and the concealments and the parsoyas and the mesachim, the veils and the sheaths and the cloaks that somewhat distort the picture. We still retain that pure dimension. So even a person who's suffering from terrible mental illness, God forbid, or emotional instability, the neshama tahira is still there. That's why Chassidus talks so much about etzem ha-nefesh. Etzem ha-nefesh is never affected by any of this, because etzem ha-nefesh is directly connected to the etzem that's not been subjected and affected by all these shifts. Then we talk about etzem ha-nefesh is neisa keches, which means that etzem ha-nefesh contains the ability for all the faculties. Then we talk about keches ha-klolim b'nefesh, faculties that are encompassed in the soul. And then we talk about faculties that are keches atzmim. They're not encompassed, but they're still core faculties. Then there's keches heyulim. They're like archetypes and potential faculties. Then there's keches nalomim, concealed faculties, all the way to keches geluyim, revealed faculties as we see them. So when you talk about any illness or disease, including mental and emotional, you have to know which level does it affect. The etzem for sure not. Keches atzmim definitely not. Also not. Keches klulim not. Keches heyulim also not. It affects perhaps the keches nalomim, and maybe a little higher than that. And what does it affect? Does it affect that the container is compromised, or is it maybe the channel that connects the container? Like, for example, when you see someone who's blind, God forbid, it can be that the eye vessel, the eye, is damaged, or it can be the optic nerve. But the kayach of riyah is there. That's why Chassidus brings that two even blind parents, born blind, will give birth to a child that sees, because their defect is not on the core level; it's on outer levels. They give birth to a child; the child is accessing those inner levels. The Rebbe speaks to that famous dollars that I've mentioned a number of times. The child that was very autistic, his father mentions this, and the Rebbe says right away, they say autism is they don't have a relationship with others, but they have a relationship directly with God. What is that saying? That there's a dimension where their relationship is intact. It's on certain dimensions, on the social order of universe, on a keches gluyim level, a keches nalomim level, that perhaps there's a compromise. But never think that there's a compromise on the fundamental inner level. And that's why when we deal, whether it's with a Down syndrome child, with, God forbid, a retarded or handicapped child, special needs, and so on, their soul is always intact, and in many ways comes to us unfiltered in certain ways. However, on the level, just like, God forbid, a handicap like blindness or others affects the outer dimensions, here there's also an effect. And that's not what we want. We want to have ramach evorim shasa gidim. But don't ever think that the core levels are compromised. And as such, that's why the Rebbe writes in his letters to people with special children, how you treat them. You have to know and believe in that soul. Someone who doesn't believe shouldn't treat such children, shouldn't deal with such children. This is definitely a contribution that the medical community and the psychological community can worthwhile hearing. But not just hearing a nice thought, we're optimistic because the soul is intact. It's actually a model. It's a model of how health becomes a lack of health through the whole Seder Ishtalshalos. Now this of course can be elaborated on. I want to just refer one more thing to the night, the psyche from the Shvi Shel Pesach, the night of Shvi Shel Pesach, Tomchei Tmimim, where the Rebbe actually spoke about children as that they are an example of lifnei hatzimtzum because they're completely preoccupied with something. And they don't leave room for anything else, no other mitzias, mamala kol mitzias. And then there's how the child has a desire, but has room for something else. And the Rebbe says that can be applied through Atzilus Bri Yitzir Asiyah. So somewhat of what I'm saying is also based on the ideas there. And of course also based on the Maimer in Tavshin Tazayin, the Bris, the way the Rebbe spoke again, those words, the Bris by Yolis, by Rabbi Yolis' child, or grandchild, and also about the Atzilus being Bittul B'Mitzias Ayin, and Bria is Efshari Samitzias, and then there's the Tzura, Yitzira is the Aschol Samitzias, and the Asiyah being the full Mitzias. Just some sources for this whole discussion. Okay, because of time, I will address the mental health questions, other ones that I have not addressed now, in the next episode. And since again time is limited, I also was going to talk about an intrusive mother-in-law, which again I will speak about next episode. I apologize. I will go to the Chassidus question, and then I'll do the essays. The reason I don't want to rush anything is because these topics deserve full attention, and to just say a quick answer, I'd prefer to wait and do it more elaborately. The Chassidus question of this week is, with two souls, who's in charge? The more I learn Tanya, the more confused I get. There are two nefashos within us, They each have their own wants and strengths, and when the Beinoni chooses to follow the Nefesh Elokis, Tanya says in chapter 13 that Hashem helps the Nefesh Elokis to overcome the other. So let me get straight to the point. If they're fighting, who decides? If there's a divine soul and an animal soul, who is the decider? And if Hashem is the one making is the one that sides with the Nefesh Elokis, the divine, to overcome the animal soul, who am I? Where do we come in? Am I some third strength called Bechira? What role do we play? It's also confusing without more clarity about who the person being told to choose is. Thank you for your help. Okay. So, my friend, feel good that you're not the first one that asked this question. As a matter of fact, that Tzemach Tzedek has this question. In Hagos on Tanya, in chapter 10, so the Alter Rebbe uses the Lashon there. In chapter 10, the Lashon in Perek Yud is V'ha'odam, v'hine k'sha'odam mag b'nafesh elokis. After he explains in chapter 9, Tanya, that there's two, divine soul and animal soul. The divine soul wants elokus, and just resides in the mind, the reflective mind. The animal soul resides in the heart and the blood, which is impulsive. And each one wants to conquer the ir ktana ze'aguf, the body, the entire person. So then he says, when the person causes his divine soul to overpower the animal soul. So on the word Kisha Adam, the Tzemach Tzedek writes the following. Ayin l'kamam perek chavtes, l'masha makshina ela mihu Adam. Look later, chapter 29, in addressing the question of the Welt asked the question, who is this Adam? You just said Nefesh Elokis, Nefesh Abamis. Who's the Adam that's choosing? The Tanya doesn't refer to a third dimension. Now, in Perek Chavtes, what does he say? When he compares the difference between a tzaddik and a Beinoni, he says, by the Beinoni, the Nefesh HaChayunis, the animals, you could say the Chayunis and Bamis often are interchangeable. The soul that sustains, that energizes the body, that's what's strong in him. And he ha'adam atzmei. So by a Beinoni, that's what's called Adam, because that's the dominant soul. Mashenkin, by tzaddikim, it's the opposite. Because their soul is what dominates, their divine soul dominates, and that's hu ha'adam. So who's the real person? That's the divine soul. And the body is only called basar adam. V'nafsham nikra basar adam, that's like the flesh, okay. Now, if you say, and the Parshas that the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek is referring to that, he's basically saying that based on Perek Chavtes, to understand Mihu Adam, who is the person, like you're asking, who's the one that decides? So that's the answer. That by Tzaddik, who's the Adam, is the Nefesh Elokis, and by Beinoni, it's the Nefesh HaChayunis, it's Nefesh Abamis. However, it seems to still be lacking because who really decides? That's why there are those that say, and this comes from Chassidim, I don't know if there's an actual source, that even though in Tanya talks about two nefashos, two souls, in Chassidus, in Likutei Torah, I believe in, let me see, the sources are B'chukei and some other places, it talks that there's a third soul called Nefesh HaSichlis. The Nefesh HaSichlis, and the Nefesh HaSichlis is the one that actually decides. So the Nefesh Elokis states its opinion, the Nefesh Abamis states its opinion, and Nefesh Sichlis is where the Bechira actually takes place, and that's the Adam. The Adam is the Nefesh HaSichlis. Maybe that's why he uses in Perek Chavtes the Lashon Nefesh HaChayunis, maybe that's connected a little more to Sichlis than to Abamis, maybe. And that's what the deciding factor. But still the question remains with Perek Yud Gimel, which is, if God is taking the side always of the Nefesh Elokis, so what's the choice here? Well, Ma'aseh B'Peil. We see, in all of us, we see practically. If that's the case, that God has always taken the side of Nefesh Elokis, why is it that we are always losing? Or so often the Nefesh Elokis does not win out. But think of it like a communist court. It says there in Perek Yud Gimel that Zev Zeh Sheftan. By Beinoni, both sides are Sheftim. There are two judges. Now in a democratic court, you have a judge, a prosecutor, and you have a defense attorney. A kateger and a saneger. When it comes to a communist court, you only have prosecutors. So imagine the Yetzer Hara tells you its opinion. It so persuades your emotions that you act on it and you never let the other shayfet speak. That's your choice. That's the Ha'adam chooses. Or you say, you know what? We heard what the Yetzer Hara has to say, the Nefesh Habahamis has to say. Now let's hear equal time. Give it to Nefesh Elikis. You do that, guaranteed, says Tanya, that the Eibishter will come as a third party and it'll be 2 against 1. But that's up to us. So the major part is up to us. The Ezeh, HaKadosh Baruch HaEzrei will come if you allow it to come. Unfortunately, the power of like he says in Perek Tes, of the Yetzer Hara and the emotions are so impulsive that most of our mistakes happen before we allow the other side to even speak. So you never hear the case of the Nefesh Elikis. Even if you'll hear it, it's not really equal time, not with the same respect and so on. So if you think about it, this is actually very practical and applies itself to each of our lives all the time. Allow the reflective mind to challenge something you want to do impulsively, and rest assured, in most cases, you get really angry. As the Razah, I think, said, wait 48 hours, wait 24 hours, 36 hours, with the different girsayis and nuschayis on it. Because as soon as you are in the moment of passion, be'idna derischa, it's very difficult to control yourself. And most of our mistakes happen when we're spontaneous. Reflect, allow the mind to come in, which brings the Nefesh Elikis' perspective. And then, HaKadosh Baruch HaEzrei, you have far more chance, if not always, to prevail. So I hope that answers the question in this Chassidus. The essays, we have 2 essays we want to do, because the first essay I did was the tension between matter and spirit by Schneur Zalman Pevzner, Olav Shalom. And now I want to do 2 more. One, Struggle on Purpose by David Carpel, age 45, teacher at Roar Base Chai Academy, Coral Springs, Florida. And what does he write? Struggle on Purpose. Okay, he takes basically Perek Chavav in Tanya, chapter 26. The Alter Rebbe begins there with the mashal why simcha is important and not atzvus. That a person should not allow themselves to become depressed, because you cannot fight a battle when you're weakened and demoralized by depression. And he goes and turns it into a very entertaining piece. Fighters train to fight by fighting. To explain how we train to fight. That the goal here is not even the victory. The goal is to know how to fight. To know, to be strong, to be confident, and to be upbeat. And he brings it into physical training examples, and military training, and jiu-jitsu, and striking, and all different battles. So it's a very interesting piece of taking Tanya and making it very relevant, and applying it to our lives. And he speaks about it in the context of one particular line I wanted to read to you. Play guitar, he says, and then learn to play guitar. Bang a drum and then learn to play the drums. Fill a canvas with paints and then learn to paint. In other words, throw yourself into the water and then swim. Obviously, we need some training, but the point is the attitude is critical, the confidence, that's critical. So you train your mind and your body to melt the ice of doubt and laziness held in the coarse shell of your flesh, muscle, and bone. You build your ability to push yourself to the edge, to challenge yourself in order to get to the core self and express that truth in the world, because that's the truth with which you will fulfill your purpose in the constant creation of existence. The conflict of our souls, he concludes, visualized as the Alter Rebbe expounded, is the image of determination, perseverance, and heart working in concert with the body, ready to pound the evil inclination into submission until the next time. So that essay, as the other essays are you can read on meaningfullife.com/mylife/contest. And finally, essay Lessons from a New Year, What Blowing the Shofar Can Teach Us About Helping Individuals Who Struggle with Depression by Zalman Friedman, age 31, teacher at Cheder Menachem in Los Angeles, California. So changing names, he says there's David, a close friend who became depressed. And he sees how all the people respond to him and to try to get him out of that situation, and nothing works. Without elaborating all the options, again, which you can read, he says that suddenly when he's learning about Rosh Hashanah, he's discovered a new approach, which he applied to this friend of his, and he wants to share that approach. What does Chassidus teach? That right before Rosh Hashanah, the whole world goes into a comatose state, only to be renewed through our blowing of the shofar, where we elicit the desire and the will of Hashem to reconnect to us. So he applies that, and he says that while we dare not project human experiences onto God's omnipotence, we are taught to apply to ourselves the divine phenomenon we learn about, hoping to extract the minutest measure of comprehension of God. So he writes, in this case it seems obvious to me that depression is the human experience which most closely resembles the divine phenomenon of pre-Rosh Hashanah, extreme isolation and complete disinterest, two common symptoms of depression. Closely mirrors God's withdrawal from and lack of concern with creation, Kavyochel, of course. And he says, in the most severe cases, a depressed person might consider ending his or her life entirely, heaven forbid, which is not entirely dissimilar to God considering whether to continue creating the world and thereby live his purpose, thereby leave his purpose for the continue creating and thereby live his purpose for the coming year. And he talks about the Aliyas HaMalchus, Histalkus HaMalchus. The attribute of Malchus being vacant is a form of depression as it evolves in our terms. Again, Kavyochel. And how do we build Malchus? By evoking deeper Ratzon, a deeper desire in the source, in the engine room, for God to re-engage with us through the shofar. And then through the Pesukim of Malchus. So he says, the message of Rosh Hashanah therefore presents us with a power alternative to dealing with a person with depression. Make the person feel needed. Don't tell them that everything is going to be good, there are other things good. You can help try that too, but make them feel needed. This goes far beyond supporting the individual and lifting their spirits. This addresses depression at its very essence. Being needed is to be valued. Being needed is to escape one's own reality and recognize a world outside. Being needed is to have something to live for. And how do you do it, as he says? Shofar. What does shofar do? It just pierces. The simple blast represents an uncontrollable cry from the depths of the soul and heart to God. We need you. Don't forsake us. And that can be applied equally. And then he concludes that he recently shared with David, again, fictional name, my thoughts on how Rosh Hashanah teaches us to deal with depression, asking him how it compared to his own experience. He was silent for a few moments and then confided, when I was at my lowest point and I felt like I couldn't go on any longer, my wife broke down and cried, don't go anywhere. I need you here. That simple plea shook me to my core. It gave me a reason to live. So with that, we've reviewed the essays. And again, I can say Chag Sameach, or whatever we call Tezvav of Elul, commemorating the Siyazis Yeshiva going to Chayil, which is for sure a Yom Tov. This is also a Yom Tov in every different forms. May we use these special days as we're going now into the second half of Elul, as the Rebbe says, it's 15 days, 2 weeks before the Chag, to prepare for the Rosh Hashanah. Here we just heard a lesson in that, as well as the Rebbe says, the Ma'atonis, and preparing gifts and food for those that are needy in the need of Rosh Hashanah, the Rebbe's mitzvah that he established in the late Lameds. And each of us should have a ksiv v'chsim eteva. May our channels be opened through the powers of Chassidus that emanate, especially in these days, and all experience total health, the Eris and Kalim, in a seamless fashion. Until next week, everyone should have a very blessed week. Until next week will be episode 83 will be next week, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone be blessed.